I should have known something was wrong when my mother opened the door wearing the necklace. Not wrong in the way you'd expect. No shouting, no slammed doors, nothing dramatic at all. Just my mother in her cream cashmere sweater, the one she saves for important occasions, with 3 carats of diamonds catching the morning light at her throat. The same necklace I'd watched my father present to her the night before, his hands shaking slightly as he fastened the clasp, both of them pretending I wasn't standing right there in the doorway with my coat still on. "Grant," she said, stepping back to let me in. "You're early. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." I wasn't early. I was exactly on time, the way I always am, but this was her way of saying I should have known better than to expect punctuality to matter on Christmas morning when my sister hadn't arrived yet. "Traffic was light," I said, which was true and also irrelevant. The house smelled like cinnamon rolls, the expensive kind from the bakery downtown, not the grocery store tubes my mother used to buy when I was younger. I'd paid that bakery bill 3 months running when their credit card got declined, but we don't talk about things like that. We talk about traffic and whether the tree looks better this year than last. My father appeared from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, reading glasses perched on his nose. "There he is," he announced to nobody in particular. "Merry Christmas, son." "Merry Christmas," I replied, setting down the bags I'd brought. 4 of them, each carefully wrapped, each representing more thought than I'd probably receive in return. But that's not why I brought them. At least that's what I told myself. The living room looked exactly as it had looked every Christmas for the past 15 years, minus the gradual upgrades I'd quietly funded. New couch 3 years ago when the spring started breaking through. Entertainment center 2 years ago when the old one collapsed. The tree itself, a 7-foot Douglas fir that cost more than my first car, positioned in front of the bay window that overlooked the street. I'd paid for that window repair too, after the seal broke and condensation started forming between the panes. My father had spent 2 weeks complaining about contractors before I simply arranged for it to be fixed and sent him the invoice marked paid in full. He'd thanked me with the same enthusiasm you'd thank someone for holding a door open. A brief nod, a distracted smile, nothing more. "Coffee?" my mother asked, already moving toward the kitchen without waiting for an answer. "Sure," I said, though I'd already had 2 cups before leaving my apartment. I stood there in the living room, surrounded by furniture I'd essentially purchased, in a house I'd essentially saved, waiting for my sister to arrive so we could begin the annual tradition of pretending we were a normal family who enjoyed each other's company. The presents I'd brought sat on the entry table, looking somehow both expensive and inadequate. I'd spent 3 weeks selecting them. For my father, a first edition of a book he'd mentioned wanting back in September. For my mother, a spa weekend at that resort she'd circled in a magazine 6 months ago. For my sister, concert tickets to see her favorite band, the one she'd been complaining was sold out every time I saw her. Thoughtful gifts, expensive gifts. The kind of gifts that were supposed to mean something. My mother returned with coffee in a mug I recognized from my college graduation. One of a set I'd bought them after their previous set mysteriously disappeared during a kitchen renovation. She handed it to me without comment, her attention already drifting toward the window, watching for my sister's car. "She texted that she's 5 minutes away," my mother said. "You know how she is with mornings." I did know. I knew that my sister treated punctuality as a suggestion, that she'd arrive whenever she felt like arriving, and that nobody would comment on it, because that's just how Sarah was, spontaneous and free-spirited, not bound by the rigid expectations that seemed to apply only to me. I sat down on the couch, my couch technically, though nobody knew that, and waited. My father settled into his chair, the leather recliner that had been his throne for as long as I could remember. "How's work?" he asked, the way he always asked, with the tone of someone inquiring about a hobby rather than a career. "Busy," I said. "Year-end reporting, client reviews, the usual." He nodded, already losing interest. My father had never quite understood what I did for a living. Hedge fund manager sounded impressive, but the specifics bored him. He preferred tangible work, things you could point to and see. Numbers on screens meant nothing to him, even when those numbers represented the money that kept his household running. "Must be nice," he said, "working with computers all day. Beats real work, I suppose." There it was, casual dismissal wrapped in a joke that wasn't quite a joke. I'd heard variations of this for years, ever since I'd left college and chosen finance over whatever undefined path he'd imagined for me. He'd wanted me to do something practical, something respectable. Instead, I'd become exactly the kind of person he complained about when he read the news, wealthy, detached, part of the problem. The fact that my wealth was currently paying his mortgage didn't seem to register. "Someone has to do it," I said, keeping my voice neutral. My mother returned from the kitchen again, this time with a plate of cookies she'd arranged in a perfect spiral. Store-bought, I noticed, but displayed like she'd baked them herself. She set them on the coffee table and smoothed her sweater, her fingers briefly touching the necklace at her throat. I wondered if she remembered that I'd been there when my father gave it to her. I wondered if either of them had considered how it might feel to watch your parents exchange expensive gifts while treating your own contributions like charitable donations they'd been forced to accept. The sound of a car door slamming announced my sister's arrival. My mother's face transformed instantly, tension releasing, smile widening. She rushed to the door before Sarah even reached it, pulling it open in a gesture of welcome that felt several degrees warmer than the one I'd received. "Merry Christmas!" Sarah burst through the doorway, all energy and noise, her arms full of bags that looked hastily wrapped. She hugged my mother, kissed my father's cheek, and finally glanced in my direction. "Hey, Grant." "Hey," I said. She was wearing a new coat, I noticed. Expensive, designer label visible on the collar. I didn't recognize it from the last time I'd seen her, which meant it was recent. I wondered who'd paid for it, then decided I didn't want to know. We settled around the tree, my parents on either side like bookends, Sarah sprawled on the floor the way she'd done since childhood, me perched on the edge of the couch trying to look comfortable while feeling increasingly out of place. "Should we start?" my mother asked, her hands already reaching for the first package. My father nodded, and we began the ritual. One present at a time, everyone watching as each person opened their gift, the prescribed oohs and ahs distributed on cue. My father opened the book I'd brought him, turned it over in his hands, and set it aside with a brief, "Thanks, son." My mother unwrapped the SPA certificate, read it twice, and smiled in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How thoughtful," she said, which I'd learned was code for, "This makes me uncomfortable." Sarah opened her concert tickets, squealed appropriately, and actually hugged me, which felt like more genuine gratitude than I'd received from my parents in years. Then it was my turn. I unwrapped 3 gifts with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned not to expect much. A sweater from my mother that was 2 sizes too large, a book from my father that I'd mentioned reading 6 months ago, a gift card from my sister in an amount that suggested she'd grabbed it at the last minute from a pharmacy checkout line. "Perfect," I said, because that's what you say. "Thank you." We moved through the rest of the presents, the pile shrinking until only one remained. A small box wrapped in silver paper, tucked behind the tree where it had been easy to miss. "Oh," my mother said, as if she'd forgotten. "One more." She handed it to my sister, who opened it with exaggerated care, building suspense. Inside was a jewelry box. Inside that box was a bracelet, delicate gold with small stones that caught the light. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed. "Mom, Dad, you shouldn't have." My father beamed. My mother fussed with the clasp, helping Sarah fasten it around her wrist. They admired it together, the 3 of them, a unit I wasn't part of. I sat there holding my oversized sweater, watching my sister model a bracelet that probably cost more than everything I'd received combined, and tried to calculate when exactly I'd become the family's ATM rather than its son. The morning continued. Brunch was served, catered, expensive, paid for by me whether they acknowledged it or not. Conversation flowed around me about Sarah's job prospects, about my parents' plans to redecorate the kitchen, about everything except anything that mattered. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked about my life beyond the superficial question about work. I was present, but not participating. Necessary, but not wanted. Valuable only for what I could provide rather than who I was. And through it all, my mother wore that necklace, the diamonds catching every light, reminding me with every glance that I would always be the son who tried too hard, who gave too much, who mistook generosity for love and wondered why it never quite felt returned. I should have said something, should have stood up, should have walked out, should have done anything other than sit there and accept it, but I didn't. Not yet. Because I'd spent 3 years learning that silence was its own kind of power, that patience was sharper than anger, and that revenge was a dish best served with careful documentation and a very good attorney. I just didn't know I'd need those lessons quite so soon. I left my parents' house at 2 in the afternoon with a bag full of gifts I'd never use and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The drive back to my apartment took 40 minutes, long enough for the anger to settle into something colder and more useful. I didn't blast music or grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I just drove, watching the suburbs give way to the city, thinking about necklaces and bracelets and the specific way my mother had looked through me when I'd said goodbye. "Drive safe," she'd called from the doorway, already turning back inside before I'd reached my car. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, clean, organized, expensive in the way that suggested success rather than screamed it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, furniture that matched, art on the walls that I'd actually chosen rather than inherited. Everything in its place. Everything under control. I dropped the bag of gifts by the door and went straight to my office. The filing cabinet in the corner held 3 years of documents that my parents had never asked about. Tax records, property transfers, mortgage statements, utility bills, everything organized by date, everything meticulously maintained, everything pointing to a truth they'd apparently forgotten or chosen to ignore. I pulled out the folder labeled Residential Property, 2847 Maple Drive, and spread its contents across my desk. The purchase agreement stared back at me, dated 3 years and 4 months ago. Purchase price, $640,000. Buyer, Meridian Holdings, LLC. A company I'd created specifically for this transaction, bland and anonymous enough that nobody would think to question it. I'd been 26 when I bought my parents' house. Young, relatively new to my job, but already making enough money to recognize a crisis when I saw one. My father had called me that spring, his voice careful in the way it got when he needed something but didn't want to ask directly. "Your mother and I are dealing with some financial complications," he'd said. "Nothing serious, just some restructuring." Restructuring. That's what he'd called it when the bank sent foreclosure notices. When the mortgage they'd refinanced twice to cover renovations and vacations came due and they couldn't pay. When the house they'd lived in for 30 years was 60 days from being sold at auction. I'd asked how much they needed. He'd named a number that was less than half of what they actually owed. I'd had my attorney pull the full financial picture, and it was worse than I'd thought. They weren't just behind on the mortgage, they'd taken out a second lien, maxed out 3 credit cards, and borrowed against my father's pension. Helping them pay it down would have taken years. They'd have resented every payment, every reminder of their failure. So I'd done something simpler. I bought the house outright. Not in my name. That would have been too obvious, too humiliating for them. Instead, I'd created Meridian Holdings, purchased the property through the company, and then arranged for my parents to remain as tenants at 0 cost. The mortgage disappeared. The foreclosure notices stopped. The crisis evaporated. My attorney had called it creative problem solving. I'd called it keeping my mother from having a breakdown. My father had called me 2 weeks after the closing, confused and relieved. "Some investment company bought the house," he'd said. "They're letting us stay here rent-free. Can you believe that? Must be some kind of tax strategy." I'd made appropriate surprised noises and congratulated him on his good fortune. He'd never asked for details. Neither had my mother. They'd simply accepted that their problem had been solved by mysterious benefactors and moved on with their lives. 3 years. 3 years of property taxes I'd paid. 3 years of insurance premiums. 3 years of maintenance costs and repairs and upgrades. 3 years of watching them live in a house they thought was still theirs, while treating me like an obligation they'd been forced to tolerate. I sat back in my chair and reviewed the numbers. Current property value, estimated at $780,000. I'd essentially given them a gift worth $750,000, and they'd responded by buying my sister jewelry while handing me a gift card. The arithmetic of it was almost funny. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages I'd ignored since leaving their house. 2 texts from my mother, both about leftovers she wanted to send home with me. 1 from my sister, thanking me again for the concert tickets. Nothing from my father. There was also an email from my property manager, the one who handled the administrative details of Meridian Holdings. Monthly report, routine maintenance completed, all systems normal. The house was in perfect condition because I made sure it stayed that way. I forwarded the email to my attorney with a single line. "Need to discuss property management options for 2847 Maple Drive." His response came back within 15 minutes. "Call me tomorrow. Office opens at 9. I set the phone down and stared at the documents spread across my desk. The purchase agreement, the deed, the insurance policies, the tax records. Every piece of paper proof that the house my parents lived in, the house they'd raised me in, the house they seemed to think entitled them to treat me however they wanted. That house was mine, not theirs, mine. The realization didn't bring satisfaction exactly. It brought something sharper and cleaner, leverage. I'd spent 3 years being generous, being patient, being the son who showed up and paid for things and never asked for recognition. I'd convinced myself that it was enough to help quietly, to be the solution to their problems without needing them to acknowledge it. But watching my mother wear diamonds my father had somehow afforded while my own gifts sat unopened and unappreciated, that changed the equation. They didn't want a son. They wanted a resource, something to extract value from without obligation, without gratitude, without even the basic courtesy of pretending they cared. Fine. If that's what they wanted, that's what they'd get. But resources can be withdrawn. Generosity can stop. And houses can be reclaimed. I pulled up the operating agreement for Meridian Holdings on my computer. Everything was in order, everything legal, everything documented exactly the way it needed to be. The company owned the property. I owned the company. My parents were listed as occupants, not owners, with no lease agreement and no tenant rights beyond what I chose to extend. I could end their occupancy anytime I wanted. 30 days' notice, standard eviction procedures, completely by the book. No fraud, no illegal tactics, nothing they could fight beyond hiring an attorney they couldn't afford to argue a case they'd certainly lose. The thought sat there in my mind, dangerous and appealing. I wasn't ready to act yet. Anger made people sloppy, and I'd spent my entire career learning that patience beat impulse every time. But I could prepare. I could review my options. I could make sure that when I did decide to move, everything would be positioned exactly right. I spent the next 3 hours going through every document, every receipt, every record of money I'd spent on that house. The furnace I'd replaced last winter, the roof repairs after the storm, the landscaping service I'd paid for monthly, the pest control, the snow removal, every single thing that had kept that property valuable and livable. The total came to just over $200,000 in improvements and maintenance over 3 years, on top of the purchase price. Nearly $1 million invested in making sure my parents could live comfortably while they apparently saved their money for jewelry and designer coats for my sister. My phone buzzed. Another text from my mother. "Did you get home safely? Let me know." I typed back, "Home safe. Thanks for today." A lie. I wasn't thankful, but that was fine. They'd been lying to themselves for 3 years about where their security came from. I could manage one polite text message. Her response came immediately. "So glad you could make it. Sarah was so happy to see you." Sarah was happy to see me because I'd given her concert tickets. My mother was glad I could make it because I'd shown up with expensive gifts. Nobody was happy to see me for any reason that had to do with who I actually was. I put the phone face down on the desk and went back to the documents. There was a contract clause I'd had my attorney add, something I'd thought was just prudent legal protection at the time. A termination clause that allowed me to end the occupancy arrangement with proper notice for any reason, including change in company strategic objectives, or property portfolio rebalancing. Vague corporate language that meant exactly what I needed it to mean. I could take the house back whenever I wanted. I pulled up my calendar and counted forward. 30 days from today would be late January, middle of winter. Cold enough to be uncomfortable, but not cold enough to be genuinely dangerous. Enough time for them to panic, but not enough time for them to mount any real defense. The timeline felt right. Not impulsive, not emotional. Just appropriate. I drafted an email to my attorney outlining what I wanted to explore: termination procedures, notice requirements, legal exposure, options for disposition of the property after reclamation. I saved it as a draft, not quite ready to send it yet, but ready to have it prepared. Tomorrow I'd call him. Tomorrow I'd start the process. Tomorrow I'd begin converting 3 years of quiet generosity into something they couldn't ignore. But tonight, I sat in my apartment with documents spread across my desk and let myself feel something I hadn't allowed in years. Certainty. They'd made their choice. They'd decided I was worth less than jewelry, less than designer coats, less than whatever illusion of family they'd constructed that didn't include treating me with basic respect. Fine. They could live with that choice. They could live with all of it. Just not in my house. I gathered the documents and returned them to the filing cabinet, everything organized exactly as it had been. Then I poured myself 2 fingers of scotch, sat by the window, and watched the city lights spread out below. Somewhere across town, my parents were probably watching television in their living room, comfortable and secure, believing that their house was theirs and their problems were solved, and their son would always be there to subsidize whatever life they wanted to live. Let them believe it. For now. In 30 days, they'd learn exactly how much their comfort had cost them, and more specifically, who'd been paying for it all along. I raised my glass to the window, to the city, to the future I was about to create. "Merry Christmas," I said to nobody in particular. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed, already planning the first call I'd make in the morning. The call with my attorney lasted 45 minutes and cost me $800, but by the end of it, I had a roadmap. "You're absolutely certain about this?" Marcus asked for the 3rd time. He'd been my attorney for 5 years, handled everything from contract reviews to the Meridian Holdings setup, and he knew me well enough to recognize when I'd made a decision that couldn't be unmade. "Completely certain," I said, watching traffic move past my office window 23 floors below. "Then we'll start with the financial terminations first. Utilities, services, anything routed through your accounts. Give them a week to notice before we send the formal notice. It's cleaner that way, shows pattern of disengagement rather than sudden retaliation. How long until we can move on the property?" 30 days minimum for the notice period. But Grant, once you start this, there's no walking it back without looking weak. You need to be prepared for them to call, to beg, to make promises. They won't keep any promises they make, I said. Probably not, but they'll make them anyway. And your sister will get involved. She always does. He was right about that. Sarah had a talent for inserting herself into situations that didn't concern her, usually on the side of whoever needed defending, regardless of facts. Let her, I said. This doesn't involve her. It will once they realize what's happening. Family situations always spread. I ended the call and pulled up my banking interface. 17 different automatic payments ran through my accounts for services related to my parents' house. Electric, gas, water, internet, lawn service, security system, pest control. Every single one set to autopay. Every single one something they'd stopped thinking about years ago. I canceled them alphabetically, starting with electric. Each cancellation required 2 confirmations and a reason. I selected account closure for all of them and set the termination date for 1 week out. January 7th. Enough time for the Christmas glow to fade, not enough time for them to prepare. The lawn service was the only one I hesitated on. My mother loved that lawn. She'd talk about it whenever I called, how green it looked, how the neighbors commented on it. She'd never connected it to the monthly charges I paid, never wondered why a service she'd never hired kept showing up like clockwork. I canceled it anyway. By noon, I'd dismantled 3 years of financial infrastructure. The house would continue functioning for another week, and then things would start to fail. Small things first: lawn unmowed, internet disconnected, security system going offline. Inconveniences that would seem like billing errors or system glitches until they accumulated into a pattern. My phone stayed silent until Wednesday. 3 days of nothing, 3 days of my parents living in ignorance while the countdown ticked away. Then my mother called. Grant, honey, we're having the strangest issue with the internet. It just stopped working this morning. Your father's been on hold with the company for an hour. I was in a meeting when she called. I let it go to voicemail, listened to the message twice, and didn't call back. She tried again that evening. I answered this time, keeping my voice neutral. Hey, Mom? Did you get my message about the internet? I did. That's frustrating. Have you tried resetting the router? Your father tried everything. They're saying the account was canceled, but that doesn't make any sense. We didn't cancel anything. Weird, I said. Must be an error on their end. I'm sure they'll fix it. Could you maybe call them? You're so much better at dealing with these companies than we are. There it was, the automatic assumption that my time, my effort, my ability to solve their problems was available on demand. I'm pretty swamped this week, I said, but I'm sure you can get it sorted out. Just be firm with them. Silence on the other end. Not long, but noticeable. My mother wasn't used to me saying no. Oh, she said finally. Okay. Well, if you have time. I'll let you know if my schedule clears up. Talk soon. I ended the call before she could respond. 2 days later, my father called. I was in the gym when my phone buzzed, his name appearing on the screen between sets. I let it ring out, finished my workout, showered, and called him back an hour later. Grant, he said, his voice tight with the specific frustration of someone who'd spent too long dealing with customer service. We need your help with something. What's up? The electric company is claiming we missed a payment. Now they're threatening to disconnect service if we don't pay some ridiculous past due amount, but we've never paid that bill. It's always been handled automatically. Handled by who? I asked, knowing exactly what he'd say. I don't know. The property management company, I assumed. The one that owns the house. Did you call them? I don't have their number. We've never needed to contact them before. I let the silence stretch. Let him sit with the realization that he'd spent 3 years living in a house without knowing who owned it or how anything was paid for. That's tough, I said finally. You should probably look into that. Grant, can you handle this? You're good at this kind of thing. I'm not sure what you want me to do, Dad. It's not my house. But you could call them, figure out what's going on. I really don't have time right now. Year-end reviews are crushing me. Maybe try calling the county records office. They should have information about the property owner. More silence. This time I could hear him breathing, could picture him in his chair with his reading glasses on, trying to work out why his son was being so unhelpful. Fine, he said. We'll figure it out. Good luck, I said, and meant it in the worst possible way. The calls increased over the next week. My mother, my father, sometimes both of them on speakerphone, each time with a new crisis. The gas bill, the security system, the pest control company showing up demanding payment for 3 months of service. I deflected every call. Too busy, not my area, can't help right now. Each time a little colder, a little more distant, until even they started to notice something had changed. Sarah called on Friday. I was expecting it. "What the hell is going on with you?" she asked, no greeting, no preamble. "I'm fine. How are you?" "Mom and Dad are freaking out. Their utilities are getting shut off, services are being canceled, and you're apparently too busy to help them." "I am busy. It's year end. You know how it is?" "No, I don't know how it is, because this isn't like you. You always help them." "Maybe I'm tired of always helping." "Jesus, Grant, they're your parents. What, you're mad because they didn't worship your Christmas gifts enough? Grow up." The thing about my sister was that she'd never had to be responsible for anything. She'd coasted through life on charm and good looks and the safety net of parents who'd always bailed her out, never wondering where that safety net came from. "This isn't about Christmas," I said. "Then what is it about?" "It's about 30 years of being treated like an ATM. It's about watching Mom wear diamonds while handing me a gift card. It's about being useful, but never valued." "Oh my God, you're seriously going to punish them over a Christmas gift?" "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not helping anymore. There's a difference." "You're being petty and vindictive and honestly kind of pathetic." "Noted. Was there anything else?" She made a sound of disgust and ended the call. I set my phone down and went back to work, reviewing quarterly reports that suddenly seemed much more interesting than my family's crisis. The formal notice from Meridian Holdings arrived at my parents' house the following Monday. Certified mail, signature required, legal language that made it clear this wasn't a billing error or administrative mistake. Marcus had drafted it perfectly. Professional, emotionless, legally airtight, 30 days to vacate. Property needed for portfolio rebalancing. No option to negotiate. Contact information for questions that would lead to a law firm receptionist trained to be polite and unhelpful. My mother called at 10 in the morning. I was in a meeting, but I saw the notification, 3 calls in rapid succession, then a voicemail, then a text. "Call me now." I waited until lunch. "Grant, we got a letter." Her voice was shaking. "From the company that owns the house. They're evicting us. 30 days. They can't do this, can they?" "What does the letter say?" "It says they're terminating our occupancy, that we need to be out by February 7th. This is insane. We've lived here for 30 years. "Do you have a lease?" I asked. "No, we never needed one. We thought the arrangement was always just understood." "Then legally they can terminate whenever they want. That's how occupancy without a lease works." "But where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to find a place in 30 days? "I don't know, Mom. That's something you'll need to figure out. Grant, please, can you help us? Can you talk to them? You know people in real estate. Maybe you can—" "I can't get involved in this." "What do you mean you can't? We're your parents. And I've helped you for 3 years. With everything, and it hasn't been enough. So now you'll have to help yourselves." I could hear her crying. Actual tears. The sound of someone realizing that the safety net they'd taken for granted was gone. "I don't understand," she said. "What did we do? Why are you acting like this?" "Think about it," I said. "Think about the last 3 years. Think about where your security came from. And then ask yourself if you ever once said thank you." I ended the call. My father called 10 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. Sarah called after that. Also voicemail. Text messages started flooding in, each one more desperate than the last, but I'd already made my decision. That evening I drove to my parents' neighborhood. Not to their house. I parked 2 blocks away, where I could see their street, but they couldn't see me. The lights were on in every room. I could picture them inside, frantic, making calls, trying to understand what was happening to them. My phone buzzed again. A text from someone I didn't recognize at first, then realized it was Jason, my father's friend from church. The one who'd helped them move furniture last year, who always seemed to be around when they needed something. "Your parents are going through a rough time. Whatever's going on between you all, maybe now's the time to let it go. Family is important." I deleted the message without responding. Another text, this one from my mother's sister, my Aunt Claire. "Your mother called me in tears. I don't know what's happening, but this isn't like you. Please call her." I blocked the number. They were rallying support, trying to build pressure, hoping that shame or guilt or family obligation would bring me back in line. But that strategy only worked if I cared what they thought, if I needed their approval. I didn't. I watched their house for another 20 minutes, then drove away. Tomorrow the real pressure would begin. Tomorrow they'd start trying to find me, to corner me, to force a conversation I had no intention of having. Let them try. I had 30 days mapped out. every move planned, every response prepared. They wanted their comfortable life back? They'd have to acknowledge where it came from first. And something told me they still hadn't figured that part out yet. They found me in the parking garage beneath my office building on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been expecting an ambush eventually. My family wasn't subtle when they felt cornered, but I hadn't anticipated my father and Sarah working together. They were waiting by my car when I came down from work, my father leaning against the concrete pillar while Sarah stood with her arms crossed, both of them trying to look casual and failing completely. "Grant," my father said as I approached, "we need to talk." I clicked my key fob. The car beeped, but I didn't move toward it. "You could have called." "You're not answering calls, or texts, or emails." "I've been busy." Sarah stepped forward, her expression somewhere between angry and desperate. "Busy? Mom's having panic attacks. Dad hasn't slept in 3 days." "And you're busy?" "Yes," I said simply. "I have a job. It requires my attention." "This requires your attention," my father said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when he wanted to remind me he was still my parent. "We got another notice yesterday. The eviction is moving forward. We've tried everything. The property management company won't return our calls. The attorneys we contacted say there's nothing we can do without a lease, and you're acting like none of this concerns you." "It doesn't concern me. It's your housing situation?" "Don't be dense, Grant. We both know you can help if you want to. You have connections. You understand this stuff." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd raised me and dismissed me in equal measure, who was standing in a parking garage playing the parent card because he'd run out of other options. "I understand it perfectly," I said. "You're occupying property you don't own, with no lease, no legal protections, and no options. The owner wants you out. That's pretty straightforward." Sarah made a noise of frustration. "God, you're being such an asshole. They need your help, and you're giving them some corporate lecture? What exactly do you want me to do?" "Talk to these people. Use your connections. You work in finance. You probably know someone who knows someone. Make this go away." The parking garage was nearly empty, our voices echoing off concrete walls. Somewhere above us, the city continued functioning, people living their lives, unaware that 3 years of careful planning was coming to a head in a basement surrounded by luxury sedans. "Why would I do that?" I asked. My father straightened. "Because we're your family." "Are we? What kind of question is that?" "A serious one. Because from where I'm standing, family implies mutual care, mutual respect, some baseline acknowledgement of each other's value beyond what we can provide." "This is about Christmas again," Sarah said, rolling her eyes. "You're literally destroying their lives over Christmas presents." "This isn't about presents. This is about 30 years of patterns. This is about being useful but never valued. This is about watching you get jewelry while I get gift cards and nobody seeing a problem with that." "So you are petty enough to punish them over gifts," Sarah said triumphantly, as if she'd caught me in something. "No, I'm practical enough to stop subsidizing people who treat me like an obligation." My father stepped closer, his face hardening. "Subsidizing? What the hell are you talking about?" "The question you should be asking," I said carefully, "is who's been paying your bills for the last 3 years? Who handled the foreclosure you pretended didn't happen? Who made sure you could keep living in comfort while treating me like hired help?" Silence, the kind that feels heavy, where you can hear the mechanical hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of car doors closing on other levels. "What are you saying?" my father asked slowly. "I'm saying you should do your research. Look into who actually owns your house. Check the property records. Find out who's behind Meridian Holdings." Sarah's face went pale. She was quicker than my father, could see where this was going before he did. "No, you didn't. I did exactly what needed to be done. I saved your house. I kept you from being foreclosed on and humiliated. I spent 3 years making sure you had stability and security. And I got a gift card and a sweater 2 sizes too large for my trouble." My father was shaking his head, not in denial, but in the way people do when they're trying to process information that doesn't fit their worldview. "You're lying. Check the records." "You can't. We would have known. Someone would have told us." "Who would have told you? The bank that got paid off, the county that processed a legal sale, the attorneys who handled the transfer. Everyone did their job. You just assumed your problems solved themselves." "You manipulative," Sarah started, but I cut her off. "Careful. You're living in my mother's guest room because you can't afford your own place. Maybe consider whether you want to anger the person keeping that roof over your head." That shut her up. She knew it was true, knew that her entire lifestyle was underwritten by our parents, who were themselves underwritten by me. The chain of dependency ran straight through me, and I just made it visible. My father was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You bought our house. 3 years ago, to prevent foreclosure. You're welcome, by the way. And now you're evicting us from it. Now I'm ending an arrangement that clearly isn't working. You're free to find another place to live, one you can actually afford. We can't afford anywhere. You know what housing costs in this area. Then move somewhere cheaper, or ask Sarah to contribute, or figure it out the way everyone else does. Sarah found her voice again. You bastard. You absolute bastard. You did this to control us, to have power over us. No, I did this to help you. The control is just a side effect you're noticing now that the help is ending. My father's hands were clenched at his sides. He looked like he wanted to hit me, like he was calculating whether he was still strong enough to physically intimidate his son in a parking garage. I watched the calculation happen, watched him realize that those days were long gone. You planned this, he said. From the beginning, this was always about control. From the beginning, this was about solving a problem you couldn't solve, about giving you security you couldn't create yourselves. The fact that you're calling it control now says more about you than it does about me. We would have figured something out. No, you wouldn't have. You'd have lost everything. And then you'd have called me asking for help, and I'd have helped you anyway, and we'd be right back here except you'd have bankruptcies on your records. So you did us a favor, Sarah said mockingly. What a hero. I did do you a favor. A massive, expensive, sustained favor that you've never once acknowledged, and now I'm done. My father was breathing hard, his face red, that vein in his forehead visible the way it got when he was truly angry. We took you in. We raised you. We gave you everything. You gave me a childhood. That's what parents are supposed to do. It doesn't entitle you to 30 years of financial support disguised as filial obligation. So that's it? You're just going to throw us out? Your own parents? I'm ending a business arrangement. You can find another place to live? In 30 days? In the middle of winter? With what money? You managed to buy Mom a diamond necklace. Maybe sell that? Sarah's eyes widened. How do you know about the necklace? Because I was there when Dad gave it to her, Christmas Eve, right before you all spent Christmas Day treating me like an inconvenience with a checkbook. That necklace cost $2,000, my father said defensively. We saved for months. You saved for months to buy jewelry while living rent-free in a house I own. That's exactly my point. The logical trap closed around them, and I could see them realize it. Every defense they offered just proved what I was saying, that they'd had resources to spare for luxuries while claiming poverty whenever bills came due. What do you want? My father asked finally, his voice defeated. What would it take to make this stop? Nothing. There's nothing you can offer me. There has to be something. Money? We can pay you back. With what? The house I bought. The equity I created. You can't pay me back with my own assets. Then what? An apology? Is that what you want? Fine. I'm sorry. We're sorry. We should have been more grateful. 3 years too late. Sarah stepped forward again, her expression shifting to something that might have been genuine emotion if I hadn't watched her manipulate our parents for decades. Grant, please. I know we messed up. I know we took you for granted. But you can't actually do this. You can't put them on the street. I'm not putting anyone on the street. I'm ending their occupancy of my property. Where they go after that is their choice. You know they can't afford anywhere else. Then maybe they should have thought about that before spending thousands on jewelry while treating me like staff. My father's voice dropped, became almost threatening. You're going to regret this. I doubt that. We're your family. That means something. That has to mean something. It meant something when you decided how much respect I deserved. It meant something when you gave Sarah everything and gave me leftovers. It means something now, just not what you want it to mean. I clicked my key fob again, moved toward my car. They didn't try to stop me, just stood there watching as I opened the door. February 7th, I said before getting in. That's your move-out date. The attorneys will handle everything from here. Don't contact me again. Grant, my father started. Don't. We're done here. I closed the door, started the engine, and backed out of the space. They stood there in my rearview mirror, two people who'd suddenly realized that the safety net they'd taken for granted was actually a person, and that person had decided to stop catching them. The confrontation should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt necessary, surgical, like setting a broken bone, painful, but required if anything was going to heal properly. My phone started buzzing before I'd even left the garage. I turned it off completely, drove home in silence, and spent the evening reviewing the final preparations for February 7th. 22 days left. 3 weeks for them to panic, to scramble, to realize that no amount of guilt or anger or family obligation would change what was coming. I poured myself a drink and watched the city lights, thinking about parking garages and diamond necklaces and the specific way my father's face had looked when he realized his son was serious. They'd try again. They always did. But the next time they came for me, they'd find doors locked and numbers blocked and a wall they couldn't climb. I'd spent 3 years being generous. Now they'd learn what I was like when I stopped. February 7th arrived cold and clear. The kind of winter morning where your breath makes clouds and the sun feels decorative rather than functional. I took the day off work. Some things required personal attention. The lockout was scheduled for 10 a.m., early enough that my parents couldn't claim they weren't given sufficient time, late enough that neighbors would be at work and not witnessing the spectacle. Marcus had arranged everything with surgical precision: bailiffs, a locksmith, 2 police officers for peacekeeping purposes, and a moving company on standby in case my parents wanted to hire them on the spot. I arrived at 9:30 and parked across the street 3 houses down, close enough to observe, far enough to maintain distance. The house looked exactly as it always had: well-maintained lawn, fresh paint, windows clean, 3 years of my money on display. The bailiff's van arrived at 9:45, followed by a patrol car. 2 officers got out, both looking bored in the way cops do when they're assigned to civil matters that don't involve actual crime. One of them was young, probably fresh out of academy. The other looked like he'd done this 100 times. My parents' car was in the driveway. They were home, waiting, probably. My mother had called 17 times in the past week. My father had tried showing up at my office twice more before building security started turning him away. Sarah had sent a 4-page email that I'd deleted without reading past the first paragraph. None of it had changed anything. The older officer walked up to the door and knocked. Official, 3 sharp raps. I watched from my car as the door opened and my father appeared, his face haggard. He'd aged 10 years in 30 days. I couldn't hear the conversation from this distance, but I knew what was being said. The officer would identify himself, explain the situation, inform my father that the property owner had obtained a legal eviction order, and that he and my mother needed to vacate immediately. My father gestured angrily. The officer remained calm. His partner moved closer to the door, positioning himself in case things escalated. The bailiff stood by the van, checking his watch. This went on for 5 minutes. My father arguing, the officers responding with professional patience, nothing changing. Finally, my mother appeared behind my father. Even from this distance, I could see she'd been crying. The bailiff approached the door with paperwork. My father took it, read it, and I saw the exact moment he understood that this was actually happening. His shoulders dropped. He turned to say something to my mother. She disappeared back into the house. The older officer spoke into his radio. The younger one stayed at the door. My father went back inside, leaving the door ajar. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Cars drove by, a few slowing to observe the police presence, but nobody stopped. This neighborhood minded its own business, especially when that business involved cops and official vehicles. At 10:20, my mother emerged carrying a small suitcase. She looked directly at my car. I don't know if she could see me through the tinted windows, but she looked right at where I was sitting, and I saw her mouth move. She said something to my father and pointed. He looked too, stared at my car for a long moment. Then he went back inside. More trips back and forth. Suitcases, boxes, bags, hastily packed. Sarah arrived in her car, screeching to a stop behind the patrol vehicle. She jumped out and ran to the officers, talking rapidly, gesturing at the house. The older officer remained unmoved. The younger one looked uncomfortable. Sarah pulled out her phone, probably calling me. I'd left my phone at home specifically to avoid this. She tried twice, then apparently gave up and started helping carry things to her car. The locksmith arrived at 10:45. He set up his equipment on the porch, waiting. The bailiff checked his paperwork again, made some notes. By 11, most of their essential belongings were loaded into Sarah's car and their own. Not everything, not even close, but enough to satisfy the legal minimum. Clothing, documents, a few boxes of items my mother insisted on saving. The older officer approached my parents as they stood on the sidewalk, both of them looking at the house like they'd never see it again. He said something. My father nodded. My mother was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. Sarah stood between them, her arm around my mother, shooting looks of pure hatred toward my car. The locksmith moved to the door. My father handed over his keys. The bailiff made a note on his tablet. The locksmith began changing the locks, the sound of his drill carrying across the cold morning air. It took 12 minutes to complete the job. New locks on the front door, back door, and side entrance to the garage. The old keys rendered useless. The locksmith tested each one, confirmed they worked, and handed a new set to the bailiff. The bailiff walked across the street toward my car. I rolled down the window. Mr. Miller? He asked, though he knew exactly who I was. That's correct. He handed me an envelope containing the new keys and a signed confirmation of eviction completion. Property is secured. Former occupants have been removed. No incidents to report. Thank you. He nodded and walked back to his van. The officers were already getting into their patrol car. The locksmith packed his equipment. Within 5 minutes, all the official vehicles were gone, leaving just my family standing on the sidewalk next to their overpacked cars. I sat there watching them, watching my father put his arm around my mother, watching Sarah load one more box into her trunk, watching them figure out what to do next. My mother looked at my car again. This time she started walking toward it. I started the engine. She broke into a half-run, waving her arms. Grant, please. I put the car in drive. Sarah ran after her, both of them crossing the street now, my father following behind, all three of them converging on my car as I prepared to leave. My mother reached my window, breathless. Please just talk to us. 5 minutes, that's all we're asking. I looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me how to tie my shoes and driven me to school, and told me she was proud of me exactly twice in 30 years. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older, broken in a way that should have made me feel something. It didn't. There's nothing to talk about, I said. We'll pay you back. Whatever it takes. We'll sell things, we'll get jobs, You can't pay me back. We've had this conversation. Sarah appeared at my mother's shoulder. You did this. You broke them. Are you happy now? I'm practical. There's a difference. You're a monster, she said. Our parents are homeless because of you. Our parents are homeless because they spent 30 years living beyond their means and expecting someone else to subsidize it. That someone was me. Now it's not. My father reached the car. He looked at me through the window, his expression unreadable. I taught you better than this. You taught me exactly this. You taught me that family is conditional, that love is transactional, that generosity is expected but never reciprocated. I learned everything from you. We made mistakes. We can fix this. No, you can't, because fixing it would require you to acknowledge what you did wrong, and you still don't see it. Then tell us, my mother said, her voice cracking. Tell us what we did. Tell us how to fix it. I already told you, in the parking garage, 2 weeks ago. The fact that you're still asking means you weren't listening. Sarah slammed her hand against my car window. You can't just leave them like this. Watch me. I started rolling up the window. My mother put her hand against the glass, as if she could stop it through force of will. Grant, please, I'm begging you. Don't do this. We're your family. You're people who share my genetics. That's all you've been for years. That's not true. It is true, and you know it. You just never thought it would matter. I finished rolling up the window. My mother's hand slid away. She was saying something, but I couldn't hear it anymore. Didn't want to hear it. I pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I saw them standing there in the middle of the street. My mother with her hand still raised, my father with his arm around her waist, Sarah shouting something I couldn't hear. I turned at the corner and they disappeared from view. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes. I parked in my assigned spot, rode the elevator to my floor, and walked into my empty, quiet, organized space. Everything in its place. Everything under control. I pulled out my phone. I'd go get it from home later, and called Marcus. It's done? He asked. It's done. Moving forward with the sale. Already have 3 interested buyers. Property's in excellent condition. Great neighborhood. Should close within 60 days. Perfect. Set it up. What about the proceeds? I'd been thinking about this for weeks. The house would sell for somewhere around $780,000. After closing costs and fees, I'd clear maybe $750,000. Add that to the $200,000 I'd spent on improvements, and the total came to just under $1 million that had flowed through my hands to provide my parents with comfort they'd never appreciated. Donate it, I said. All of it? Every penny. Find a housing charity. Something that helps people who actually need it. People who'll be grateful. That's a significant tax write-off. I don't care about the write-off. I care about making a point. What point is that? That they weren't worth it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's cold, Grant. That's practical. Set it up. Will do. Anything else? No, we're done. I ended the call and stood at my window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, my parents were figuring out where they'd sleep tonight. Sarah was probably calling everyone she knew, trying to find someone who'd take them in. They were scrambling, panicking, finally experiencing consequences. I felt nothing watching it happen. No satisfaction, no regret, no second thoughts. just the quiet certainty that I'd done exactly what needed to be done. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this. You'll spend the rest of your life regretting this." I blocked the number without responding. Another text, different number, probably Sarah. "I hope you're happy. I hope destroying them was worth it." Blocked. A third text, "We're telling everyone what you did. Everyone will know what kind of person you are." Let them tell everyone. Let them explain how their son bought their house to save them from foreclosure, and they responded by treating him like hired help. Let them explain the diamond necklaces and designer coats purchased while living in a house they didn't own. Let them explain anything they wanted. I had documentation, I had receipts. I had 3 years of bank statements showing exactly who'd been subsidizing whom. The truth was simple. I'd been generous until generosity became exploitation. Then I'd stopped. That was the whole story. I blocked the third number and turned off my phone. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. People working, living, solving their own problems. The way everyone did, the way my parents would have to learn to do without me. They found me one last time, 3 weeks after the eviction, and this time they weren't asking for anything. I was leaving the office at 8 in the evening, later than usual because I'd been avoiding going home to an empty apartment where there was nothing to do but think about what I'd done. Not regret it, I didn't regret it, but think about it anyway. Turn it over in my mind, examine it from angles I hadn't considered during the planning stages. The parking garage was nearly empty at that hour. My footsteps echoed off concrete as I walked toward my car, keys already in hand. I didn't see them until I was 10 feet away. My father stood directly in front of my car. Sarah leaned against the driver's door. Both of them had clearly been waiting, probably for hours, based on how cold they looked. I stopped walking. "We're not leaving until you listen," my father said. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Flat, empty, like something essential had been removed, and what remained was just the mechanical parts still functioning. "You're trespassing in a private garage," I said. "I can call security." "Call them. We'll still be here when they arrive. We'll still say what we came to say." Sarah pushed off from my car. She looked worse than my father, dark circles under her eyes. Her expensive coat wrinkled like she'd been sleeping in it. "You got what you wanted. They're destroyed. They're staying in a motel room that costs $200 a night that they can't afford. Mom cries every morning. Dad hasn't eaten a full meal in 2 weeks. Congratulations." I didn't want them destroyed. I wanted them to understand. "Understand what?" my father asked. "That you're capable of cruelty?" Message received. That actions have consequences. That you can't treat people however you want just because they're family. "We treated you like our son." "No, you treated me like an asset. There's a difference." Sarah moved closer, her hands shoved in her pockets. "You want to know the really messed up part? They still don't think they did anything wrong. They think you're having some kind of breakdown, that the stress of your job made you snap. Of course they do, because accepting responsibility would mean admitting they spent 3 years using me. They didn't use you. You helped them. That's what family does. Help is mutual. Help is reciprocal. What they did was exploitation with a greeting card slapped on top." My father took a step forward. Not threatening exactly, but deliberate. "You want to know what I think? I think you planned this from the beginning. I think you bought that house specifically so you could hold it over us, so you could have power. I bought that house so you wouldn't lose everything. The power was incidental." "Incidental," he repeated, like the word tasted bad. "You evicted your parents, and you're calling it incidental." "I ended an arrangement that wasn't working. You had 30 days to prepare. That's more notice than most people get. 30 days to find housing we can't afford because someone," he gestured at me, "decided to teach us a lesson about gratitude." It wasn't about gratitude. It was about basic human decency. It was about being treated like a person instead of a resource. Sarah laughed, sharp and bitter. "You want to talk about being treated like a person? You treated them like numbers on a spreadsheet. You calculated the exact amount of suffering that would hurt them most, and you executed it perfectly. That's not human decency. That's sociopathic." "That's accurate. I did calculate, I planned, I executed. The same way I handle everything else in my life. The same way I've been handling their problems for 3 years. "And now you're done handling things," my father said. "Now you're free. Now you can go back to your apartment and your job and your perfect organized life without having to deal with the messy reality of family." "Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm going to do." Something changed in my father's expression. The emptiness shifted into something harder, more focused. He took another step forward, and I realized that despite everything, despite the eviction and the humiliation and the weeks in a motel, he still thought he could intimidate me into compliance. "You need to make this right," he said, his voice dropping. "You need to fix what you broke." "I didn't break anything. You broke it years ago. I just stopped pretending it was fixable." Grant. He was close now, close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath, could see the burst blood vessels in his eyes from stress and sleeplessness. "I'm not asking any more. I'm telling you, you're going to fix this." "Or what?" The question hung there between us. Sarah shifted nervously. My father's jaw tightened. "Or we make sure everyone knows what you are," he said finally. "Everyone you work with, everyone you know. We tell them about the son who evicted his parents, who left them with nothing, who destroyed his family over Christmas presents. Go ahead, tell them. Show them the documentation, show them 3 years of bank statements, show them the foreclosure notices I paid off, show them exactly who subsidized whom." Nobody's going to care about bank statements. They're going to see a son who put his parents on the street. Let them see it. I have nothing to hide. "You think your reputation can survive this?" Sarah asked. "You think your clients want to work with someone who treats his own family like garbage?" "My clients care about returns. I provide returns. My personal life is irrelevant." "Everything's a calculation with you," my father said. "Everything's risk and reward and profit margins. When did you become this?" "When being generous stopped mattering, when I realized that no amount of help would ever be enough." He stared at me, this man who'd raised me and failed me in equal measure, and I watched him search for some leverage he could use, some pressure point that would make me fold. He wouldn't find one. "The house is selling," I said. "Closing in 5 weeks, $780,000. Every penny goes to charity." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're donating it? All of it?" "All of it, to a housing nonprofit. People who actually need help, people who'll appreciate it." "That money could have," my father started. "Could have what? Gone to you? So you could buy more jewelry and designer coats while treating me like staff?" "No, that's exactly the point. You're not getting another penny from me. Not now. Not ever." "You're insane," Sarah said. "You'd rather give away $1 million than help your own parents?" "Yes, because the money was never the point. The point was that they never deserved it, and now everyone will know that." My father's hands were shaking. Rage or desperation, or some combination. "You think you've won something here. You think you've proven something." "I've proven exactly what I needed to prove. That I don't need you. That I never needed you. That everything you have, everything you've had for 3 years, came from me. And now it's gone." "We're your parents," he said, and his voice finally cracked. "That has to mean something. It means you had 30 years to treat me like I mattered. It means you chose not to. That's what it means." I moved toward my car. Sarah didn't move from the door. "Get out of the way," I said. "No." "Sarah, move. Make me." I looked at her, this person I'd grown up with, who'd been favored and spoiled and protected at my expense for our entire lives, who stood there now, defending parents who'd never had to defend her from anything. "Fine," I said. I pulled out my phone and dialed security. "Wait," she started, but I was already talking to the guard, explaining that there were 2 people blocking my vehicle, giving them my location. Sarah moved. My father grabbed her arm, but she pulled away, stepping aside from my car door. "This isn't over," my father said as I unlocked the car. "Yes, it is. It's been over for weeks. You just didn't know it yet." I opened the door. My father moved suddenly, faster than I expected for a man his age, and shoved the door back toward me. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make a point. "Listen to me," he started. "No, I'm done listening. I'm done helping. I'm done being your solution to problems you created." I pulled the door open again, harder this time, forcing him to step back. He stood there breathing hard, looking like he wanted to do more, but knowing he couldn't, that any escalation would bring consequences he couldn't afford. "You'll regret this," he said, the same thing someone had texted me weeks ago. "When we're gone, when it's too late, you'll understand what you threw away." I threw away 3 years of being used. I threw away the illusion that family meant anything to you beyond utility. I don't regret it at all. I got in my car. Neither of them tried to stop me this time. I started the engine, backed out of the space with them standing there watching, and drove toward the exit. In my rearview mirror, I saw my father put his arm around Sarah, saw them standing together in the fluorescent garage lights, 2 people who'd lost everything because they'd never understood that everything was conditional. Security would find them in a few minutes, would escort them out, would add their names to a list of people not allowed back in the building. They'd be fine. They'd figure something out. People always did. I drove out into the night, into traffic and city lights, and the forward motion of life continuing exactly as it had before. My phone stayed off. My apartment waited, empty and organized, and exactly as I'd left it. The house would close in 5 weeks. The money would go to people who needed it. My parents would survive, or they wouldn't, with or without me. I'd done what I came to do. I'd made my point. I'd drawn the line I should have drawn years ago, and if sometimes, late at night, I thought about the look on my mother's face when she realized I wasn't stopping the car, that I was actually leaving, I reminded myself that she'd had 30 years to treat me differently. She'd chosen not to. This was just the consequence of that choice, playing out in the only way it could. I parked in my building's garage, took the elevator up, and walked into my apartment without looking back, without regret, without them.